letter to me, and I'd like to share the letter with you. It says, "My dear older sister Sarah, how I miss your smile and fireside chat. How I love the teens, and you are nearly 12 years my senior. I have been following with great interest the War of the Rebellion, and have just learned that Lincoln has established the Union Army Balloon Corps for purposes of performing aerial reconnaissance on the Confederate troops. Professor Thaddeus Sobieski Constantine Lowe had offered his services as an aeronaut to the cause. He has soared above the Battle of Bull Run. His balloon, the Eagle, ascended over Yorktown, causing the rebels to retreat toward Richmond. Why, I had heard tell that there are 7 balloons in all of the Union Air Force. How I long to fly. Dear sister, though I'm not yet of illegal age, I shall fib and enlist in the war effort on behalf of the Union to do my patriotic duty. I shall offer my services as an aeronaut. Please keep my confidence, Sarah. I shan't tell mother and father of my plans. With warmest regards, your loving brother, Rodney Allen Palmer. P.S. My secret plans are to go to Quincy, Illinois, where I want to enlist in Company A of the 83rd Volunteer Infantry, with hopes of being transferred to the Union Army Balloon Corps. Enlist he did. In March of 1864, Rodney did enlist in Company A, 83rd Infantry Division, Quincy, Illinois. While only 16 years of age, he dreamed of being in the Union Air Force, but he only saw duty as a garrison guard at Clarksville and Fort Donelson, Tennessee, and later was transferred to Nashville for additional garrison duty. He mustered out in September of 1865 after serving 18 months, which in the Civil War usually you serve 6 months or a year, so he must have volunteered to serve longer because that was kind of a long stint at the time. He sadly never saw duty as an aeronaut because right after he joined up, they disbanded the aeronaut, so he never got to realize his dream. But shortly after the close of the war, Palmer turned his attention to learning aeronautics. So he learned all he could about flying a balloon. In addition to that, he worked at a circus and learned to be a trapeze artist and an aerialist. He billed himself as Professor Rodney Palmer. And after 158 ascensions, everyone believed that he, this was the wizard of all wizards. He just was the best at the time. And I vividly remember an ascension on July 4th when I was here to visit. And he went up, I have to explain that the balloon he flew in didn't have a basket like most balloons did. He did his trapeze rigging and his rings from the balloon strings. He had no safety equipment, nothing. As the balloon went up, he was swinging on his trapeze, and he'd let go and catch on to the rings, and he just did fantastic. People were just awestruck. They just thought that he just, was wonderful. But this particular day, he shot up over a mile up in the sky, and there was a pretty good wind blowing, and it carried him pretty quickly. And the crowd panicked because he was headed right for the river, and they thought, well, if he goes down in the river, the balloon and the riggings, he's going to get tangled, he'll drown for sure. But Radley, seeing that he was in trouble, he started swinging on the trapeze as hard as he could. And he got the balloon to waver a little bit so that he didn't go out into the deepest part of the river. He landed in one of the canals that led to the river. And as it came down, he swung and dropped off so that he was free of the balloon. And when they came, they sent wagons and that, they expected to find him drowned, or at the very least, they couldn't find him. And he was standing on the riverbank waiting to be picked up. So he just kind of was like a cat. He had umpteen lives, and so many times he should have been hurt, but he wasn't. Then he traveled with an entourage of Rocky Mountain bears. So as was his practice, he would go up in his balloon, a very large one, and he'd do his trapeze work, land, perfect. People were just amazed. But he traveled with these bears, and they would tie these bears to the riggings and send them up. And the bears would be frantic. They'd be clawing at the rigging and crying like children. To me, very inhumane. But the bears always survive because bears, when they fall out of trees, they know how to roll, okay? But this particular time, bear went up, a breeze caught him, and slammed him against the side of of Mrs. Hatcher's general store. And the bear hung on shortly, but the balloon pulled him down, and down he went. Well, he had a severely bruised shoulder, but he was okay. Okay, the bear was injured, but he survived. And so Rodley continued as an aeronaut until that fateful day in Delavan. He had just joined up with the newly formed Buckley and Company's Roman Hippodrome, which was organized in this very city in 1874. And as you know, Delavan was the wintering grounds for a lot of circuses, but this circus was one of the largest, okay? In fact, they tell that their expenses for a day were $2,000. It was a lot of money, so it gives you an idea how big the circus was. One of the peculiar sights in the circus, other than Rodney flying, was Buckley's Indian band, consisting of Chief Black Eagle and 100 warriors, and they would do their Indian dance and, perform. So, it was also in 1874 that during one of Rodney's balloon ascensions in downtown Delavan, the rigging tore loose and there was a big wind, and it blew him against the Park Hotel downtown, and he was severely injured. They took him to his room, which he stayed at the Delavan House Hotel, and his friends and family cared for him, and he died several weeks later. He died September 2nd, 1874, just 7 days before his 25th birthday. His death brought sadness and gloom to all of Delavan, because he was kind of Delavan's crown prince. A large congregation was intended at the Methodist Church for his funeral. The Buckley Hippodrome Circus was sold the following year. I can't help but think that because of my brother's death, the circus lost its greatest performer.
Well, welcome to my world. My story begins in 1843. My great-grandfather, John B. Gould, as his story goes, was quite a robust kind of a person. His mom chased him down 3 times trying to enlist before he was old enough. And all the soldiers there around that area helped to bring him back. But at the age of 18 in 1861, he again enlisted as a private in New York City. He did a 3-year term. John B. Gould, New York volunteer. He was a small man, fair with brown hair and blue eyes, and he was a blacksmith by trade. The whole town marched off to war in those days. They didn't have uniforms, they didn't have instructions, they didn't have anything. That's just how they went to battle. It wasn't until World War II when the Sullivan brothers went to war, all 5 of them had died on a naval ship, that rule changed. Remember that?
Yeah. I remember hearing about it.
Yeah, and from then on things changed. Great-grandfather, he was born April 27th in New York. He was a young man, he was a patriot. He really believed in this. In his service, he was promoted to corporal. He was promoted again to sergeant that same year in December. He mustered out of service in Washington, D.C. on July 17, 1865. And he attained the rank of first sergeant on his 3rd promotion, which in a day where they didn't do a lot of practicing was pretty darn good. His regiment defended Washington until May of 1862, under the command of General Wadsworth. His regiment saw action in Antietam in 1862, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg in 1863, and Rapidian, Spotsylvania, and Pittsburgh in 1864. He was also present at the Adamoxy Courthouse when the Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army. Now, a special note about his brother also went to war with him at the same time, and he was a member of the same company. He was imprisoned at Andersonville, and he died of a bout of diarrhea, which in those days wasn't very curable. Now, you're probably wondering why the notes. Well, because it's pretty hard to memorize all this stuff. But to me, it's important to be said correctly. In the 1900s, between the War of of the states became known then as the Civil War. More died of bacterial infections than they did of cold wounds or battlefield wounds. Moving from service to his country, he moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin, which brought him here. He got married, had 8 children, 5 sons, and 3 daughters. He became a prosperous farmer and was a very well-respected citizen. In his failing health, he was admitted to Milwaukee Southern Home. He died on December 29th. He was a member of the Grand Army of the Republic at Post Fort 258. And I think some of the important things about the Civil War go with the men and the people that fought in it. 2,300,000 were from the northern states. Approximately 900,000 were slaves. Farming was the most occupation in both the South and the North. In the Civil Wars, 9% were drafted and 90% enlisted. So they believed in what they were fighting for, both sides. 364,000 of the Union side lost their lives. A third were killed or died of wounds. Wounds were the things that were not killing them the most, it was bacterial infections. They were still dealing with things like malaria, measles, typhoid fever, pneumonia, arthritis, besides all the bacterial infections which they had no cure for at that time. In those days, when the hospital tent was there and they'd bring these guys in to be corrected, it was easier to cut the limb off, throw it out the door, and bring in the next one. So when the pile got pretty high and in the heat and the bugs started crawling, they moved the tent. They didn't move the arms. And it wasn't just in one place. That was in many places. So these guys, and they still keep fighting. They still believed in what they were doing. The average soldier weighed about 145 pounds, and that was due to the fact of the poor diet. They didn't have food, not much at home, but they live off the land, what they could get from the other plantations, whichever side was fighting where. That's just the way it was. The end of the war, 1/4 of the draft age men of the South were dead, were killed. Who would have thought that 97 years later, he'd be there and I'd be standing here and he'd look like that. I think he'd be proud to think that you guys were out there, still interested in what took place then. And I think that my great-grandfather would have really liked one quote that President Lincoln said. By giving freedom to the slaves, we assure freedom to the free. And everybody here believes in freedom or we wouldn't be here. And that's my story about my great-grandfather.